You're live.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you to all our viewers for joining in today to mark the completion of 2 years of the abrogation of Article 370 in the state of J&K, the erstwhile state of J&K, should I say. I'm Manju Kak from J&K Study Center, UK. Now, on 5th of August 2019, Article 370 in the erstwhile state of J&K was abrogated and full constitutional integration was completed with the rest of India. This has marked the beginning of an era of peace and growth in the newly formed Union Territory of J&K and Ladakh regions. Within a short span of 2 years, the region has seen a rapid progress. And to name a few, this list is exhaustive, but I'm only saying a few here. The job opportunities, especially for the weaker sections like the Pahari speaking people, benefits and empowering those discriminated against, like our displaced brother and sisters from POJK, not to mention of the domicile certificate, which has not only brought inclusion to the weaker sections of the society, but also inclusion of women, which were deprived for all these years, and giving them the basic human rights, which are remarkable, and more so the representation of the common people at the grassroots level. Now, on this occasion today, we have our guests, Mrs. Arshia Malik ji and Mr. Senge ji. Mrs. Aisha Malik ji is based in Kashmir. She's a writer, a social commentator, and a bold voice on women's issue and the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. Mrs. Malik has blogs published in UK, India, and Pakistan. Mr. Senge ji is a human rights activist, columnist from Gilgit-Baltistan, and currently the director of the Washington-based Institute of Gilgit-Baltistan Studies. Now, we first start with our guest, Aisha ji. Aisha ji, I read your blog, and what touched my heart was the line which said, "You deserve what you tolerate." This is for our generations and generations actually to ponder upon. Aisha ji, how would you evaluate these 2 years in terms of the ground situation in the Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh regions? What do you has changed for the people and the land? Over to you.
Thank you, Manjuji. I'm honored to be on this panel, especially with Senge ji, because he's a veteran of activism. I am just new to this.
Thank you,
He's a much
Arshia ji.
older white.
Thank you for your kind words.
For me, when I came to the NCR region, I was assured that nothing could change in the Kashmir status quo, and that any political party thinking of abrogation or nullification or neutering of the article would be committing political suicide. But as we saw over the years, especially the last 7 to 8 years, the terror attacks intensified on India, and we could make out that the Kashmir, there's an ecosystem there which supports the Pakistani-based groups. They were getting more and more bolder. And I think the tipping point came, according to me, this is my opinion, when the Pulwama attack happened and we lost 40 security personnel in a very gruesome way. I think that kind of pushed the government to change the status quo. I'm going to go into a little bit of history of it. Basically, what Article 370 is for your viewers, basically what it meant on the ground. It was a part of the Indian Constitution that gave Jammu and Kashmir special status, which means it had its, it conferred on it the power to have a separate constitution, a state flag, and autonomy over the internal administration of the state. Which means, in contrast to other states of India, J&K had its own, constitution and a substantially higher degree of administrative autonomy. It was drafted in Part 21 of the Indian Constitution, and this thing that people need to remember is that it was titled temporary, transitional, and special provisions. So it's temporary. After the State Constituent Assembly was convened, it recommended the provisions of the Indian Constitution that should apply to the state. Recommendations would come from the State Assembly, based on which the Presidential Order of 1954 was issued. Since the state constituent assembly was dissolved, it dissolved itself without recommending the abrogation of Article 370. It was deemed that it had become a permanent feature of the Indian constitution. So the net effect was that Jammu and Kashmir state's residents, they lived under a separate set of laws, including those related to citizenship, ownership of property, and fundamental rights, as compared to the residents of other Indian states. And because the result of this provision was that it basically means, what the gist of the whole thing was, that Indian citizens from other states could not purchase land or property in Jammu and Kashmir, whereas the Kashmiris were free to go into India, Indian mainland, and they do buy property, they have property there. Now, on August 5, 2019, the government of India issued a presidential order superseding the 1954 order and making all the provisions of the Indian constitution applicable to Jammu and Kashmir. The order was based on the resolution passed in both houses of India's parliament with two-thirds majority. In addition, the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act 2019 was passed by the parliament, enacting the division of the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories, to be called the Union Territory of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, and the Union Territory of Ladakh. On the same day, the Home Minister, Mr. Amit Shah, introduced the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Bill in the Rajya Sabha, that is the higher Sabha of our parliament, to convert Jammu and Kashmir's status of a state to two separate union territories, as I said, namely the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and the Union Territory of Ladakh. The Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir was proposed to have a legislature under the bill, whereas the Union Territory of Ladakh was proposed to not have that legislature. By the end of the day, the bill was passed by the Rajya Sabha with 125 votes in its favor and 61 against, which is roughly a 67% vote in the majority. The next day, the bill was passed by the Lok Sabha, the lower house of the parliament, with 370 votes in its favor and 70 against it, which is 84%. The bill became an act, and it was signed by the president. The two union territories came into existence on 31st October 2019, and it is celebrated in India as National Unity Day. The President of India appointed a Lieutenant Governor for the territory of Jammu and Kashmir and a Lieutenant Governor for the territory of Ladakh, Union Territory of Ladakh. Both the Lieutenant Governors were sworn in by Justice Geeta Mittal, the Chief Justice of Jammu and Kashmir High Court, on 31st October 2019. First at Leh Ladakh, and then at Srinagar for Jammu and Kashmir Union Territory. The President's rule under Article 356 of the Constitution of India was ended in the state of Jammu and Kashmir on the night of 30th October 2019. President's rule is not applicable to and is not needed in a union territory, as the union territory anyway is controlled by the central government. Now, while the historical decision of abrogating Article 370 brought relief for many communities across Jammu and Kashmir who were suffering for the past 70 years, the decision has had a bigger impact on, I would say, three main people. That would be the Gorkhas, the Valmikis, the women of Jammu and Kashmir, and other marginalized communities that were basically Sunni Muslims also, but they would be from the lower caste, because we do have a caste system in India, in Kashmir. According to the Gurkhas, when I talked to them, the discriminatory Article 370 denied basic rights to their offspring in Jammu and Kashmir. They had come and settled when it used to be an erstwhile princely state around 200 years ago, 2 centuries ago. Thousands of Gurkhas who live in various parts of Jammu region, they were denied the PRC, that is the Permanent Residence Certificate. And because they were denied the PRC, they were ineligible to purchase immovable property. Their children couldn't study in a government-run educational institute. They were denied all the state scholarships. In fact, the Gorkha residents of Jammu and Kashmir, now after the abrogation, they enjoy all benefits and privilege that every other citizen of Jammu and Kashmir enjoys. In fact, they say that the decision taken on August 5, 2019, it ended their discrimination of 200 years for the entire community. And they will always celebrate it as a golden chapter in their history, because it is the day when the decimation that their forefathers and their generation suffered, it finally ended, the discrimination ended. So every year they do celebrate it as a festival. They celebrated it this year as well. Uh, they say that for previous governments we used to go and give them our representations, and it used to be thrown in the trash bins because successive governments didn't think it was important enough to do that. So that's one community. uh, After the abrogation of special status of Jammu and Kashmir under Article 370, which happened 2 years ago, West Pakistani refugees, as you mentioned, Manjuji, and the Valmiki community, they voted for the first time in the DDC District Development Council polls. These are very important polls because these are local bodies there. The West Pakistan refugees comprise members of both Hindu and Sikh communities who had migrated from the erstwhile West Punjab, which is now in Pakistan, after the partition in 1947. They had settled mainly in border areas of Jammu, and while they did participate in the parliamentary polls, the refugees, until the abrogation, had never voted for any form of elections in the former state because they were not considered as state subjects. As per the official data, 5,764 families, popularly known as the West Pakistan refugees, they settled down in various parts of Jammu in 1947. But presently, official data says the number of West Pakistan refugees has increased to over 20,000 families, or you could say 4 lakh persons. Apart from the West Pakistan refugees, there were Valmikis. Valmikis are the Dalits of the state who were brought to JNK in 1975 from Punjab. It's basically the year I was born in, and I'm already 45. So, 45 years ago, they were brought in from Punjab by the then state government, and they were given permanent residence certificates. But they had to abide by the condition that their future generations could stay in JNK only and only if they continue to be scavengers and Safai Karmacharis. Then only they could stay in the state. So, they could never ever progress to another level. Apart from this, excuse me, if you talk to the Valmiki community, they also say that they were discriminated and they had to face a whole lot of things. Even if they were given property at that time, and it used to be one room, 10 men's. So even if the family increased, they couldn't move because they couldn't purchase any land. So it was really, really discriminatory for them. Now, my personal favorite, Article 370 and 35, they were very, very prejudicial to women's rights and their empowerment. And they discriminated on gender equality. These articles established that there would be classes of citizens. There would be an A category, there would be a B category, and there would be a C category, thereby rejecting equality and the dispensation of justice. J&K State's Revenue Department, before 2002, used to issue to the women and girls of the state a conditional permanent residence certificate, which is known as a state subject. I still have mine before marriage. It was given to me based on my father's. And then when I got married, it was based on my husband's. And my father's state subject issued to me, which is mine, it says valid until marriage. Because then it would be decided whether I married a Kashmiri or I married somebody outside. So that was there. What happened then? In case a girl would get married to a non-state subject, she would lose all her rights in the state, and her children or husband could not inherit her properties in the state. It was only after the full bench of J&K High Court in a case, and this is quoted a lot, this case, Dr. Sushila Sahni versus State of J&K in 2002, challenged the appointment of a doctor on the ground that she had married someone from outside the state. And she pronounced in a judgment that such a law was illegal and they needed review, and that the women in Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh were not declared persona non grata in J&K state. They were allowed rights similar to the men folk. It's dicey here because what would happen? The woman would get the right, she could inherit property, and this is something that the counter argument comes from, but her husband couldn't, and the children couldn't, so there's this thing there. Strangely enough, if a man from J&K would marry an outsider or even a foreigner, not only would his rights remain intact, but the spouse and the progeny would also enjoy all such rights and privileges. by way of the provision of Articles 370 and 35A. So, whereas the woman, her spouse, and progeny could not enjoy rights, privileges, or inherit any properties in the state, the man could. So, this was actually very discriminatory. Article 35A was a guarantee of privileges and discrimination between the PRC, which is the permanent residence certificate holders, and all those who lived and worked in JNK but didn't have the PRC in terms of transfer, owning and disposal of properties, admissions to higher institutions of higher learning, scholarships, employment, contesting elections to panchayats, local bodies and state legislature, and to the right to franchising. Besides, you could not even get any loans from the banks. So you can understand what kind of an atmosphere the people who were deprived of these rights were living in. The minorities in JNK, like the Hindus, the Sikhs, the Christians, and the Buddhists, we call them Bodhs, were deprived of minority rights too. And strangely enough, the Muslim women in JNK would be treated under a Sharia legislation, and from marriage to divorce to owning of any properties and conjugal dispute, they were deprived of receiving justice by the provision of either the Indian law or by the jurisdiction of the Ranbir civil and penal laws. Now, what happened when Article 370 was neutered? It's not abrogated as such. People keep saying it's abrogated. It's still there. It's been nullified. It's been neutered. It's been, they say the fangs, it's been defanged. The neutering of Article 370 has ensured justice to these women as well, like all other women in India. And it is pertinent to mention here that Article 370 remained a major roadblock to the integration of the JNK state with the Union of India. It was not only gender discriminatory, but it was blatantly communal as well. And this is something which will now come from the Kashmiri Muslims, because it was influenced by political considerations. Since it was claimed that the act would not affect those state subjects who were governed by the personal laws. It was expected that Kashmiris would henceforth boycott and dissociate from any political or administrative activity in the Kashmir Valley. Since 2 years, it was expected. Everybody was expecting that big boom that would come. Riot-like situations, especially like we had post Burhan Wani killing and all. But nothing like that happened. In fact, surprisingly, people started slowly they started accepting it. They started studying it. They started understanding what it was that had tied them, or what it was that the political dynasties had been always holding this over their head, that India is going to do this, India is going to do that, in case it is about abrogated, or in case they are fully integrated into the union. This is something coming from a person who contested the DDC elections, and he is from one of the Budgam constituencies. It's Birwa, and according to him, he says, when he was interviewed, he said, neither Kashmir's middle caste nor Kashmir's lower caste have ever ruled JNK state since independence. Forget about the Dalit Kashmiri Muslims, like the Safai Karmacharis. We also have them in the valley. They are called Batals. Even intermediary Kashmiri Muslim castes, like you have the Loans, you have Banis, you have Khandes, they wouldn't even dare to think that any of them could ever be a chief minister of JNK. But since August 5, 2019, a wave of political assertion is sweeping Kashmir Valley, where many poor, young and old, men and women from intermediary castes and communities have felt politically empowered due to administration's encouragement to marginalized caste groups within Kashmir Valley, including Kashmir's Dalit and OBC Muslims. We do have them. People don't know this much. Pahadi Muslims, as well as Gujars and Bakarwals, to take part in the changing political landscape of Jammu and Kashmir. As a result, far from boycotting the District Development Council elections recently, Kashmiri people participated in huge numbers in these elections, which for the first time elected political representatives at the district level. One of the main reasons for the success of these elections was that it allowed candidates from non-elite upper castes in Kashmir to take part in an election of this scale. A large number of candidates were from these intermediary, or what we call the Pashmanda Muslim castes, who otherwise would not have even imagined taking part in such an election before 2019. This new caste awakening has further been enhanced by Kashmiri Muslims taking far greater interest in the political, social, and cultural events of mainland India. Usually they used to isolate themselves from the issues happening with India and thought they didn't need to protest or anything. But now they become very, very intertwined with whatever is happening with mainland India. Since 2019, Kashmiri Muslims who would otherwise remain detached and uninterested in the political happenings in mainland India, they're taking active interest in social and political developments and are even participating in them. Be it the anti-CAA protests in Delhi, where they need to understand what does it mean to have a CAA for India, whether they are being discriminated or not. So there's a lot of debate going on in the valley about that. Or amplifying requests for oxygen cylinders and medicines for COVID patients across India. I mean, they were part of this whole mobilization of the whole country to give oxygen cylinders to patients and hospitals across the valley. That's what's been happening in these 2 years. The development that you talk about, which was started by previous governments, I'm sure you've seen that video where Mr. Abdullah is challenging a news anchor and telling that they had started
They've
all
already
these
started.
development works and all, and the present government hasn't done anything. What the present government actually did was try to finish all those started projects, because that becomes a basis for corruption and all. People take these funds from the central government or the government, and in the end, nothing happens. And I, being a resident there, my mother being a resident there, I keep asking her, "Is the road, done? Has the bridge been finished? Has this power transformer been established?" So you keep getting these positive responses, "Ki ye ho gaya, and this happened, and this is completed, and that is done, and there's a new periphery, there's a new expressway, there's a
Absolutely.
new." So all these, and then they've started other things as well. Now you also have to understand IPC is being implemented over the whole of Kashmir Valley. So all presidential schemes, all prime minister schemes, all kinds of scholarships, everything is available to all the residents of Jammu and Kashmir. So it's a long road. We still need to build the state again, because there's been a whole lot of damage all these 3 decades. But it's
Certainly.
a start. It's a start, and hopefully.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Arsha ji, for giving that beautifully explaining historically how it went. And I couldn't help but just feel that this law being, this article being so only not discriminatory, but being so much against the common man, and how we still could hold on to it. It couldn't have been anything but political motives. Thank you so much. I would now like to invite Mr. Senge Serene to give his opinion about what's been happening lately in Baltistan, considering the political situation, the recent elections. We have another program on 12th to discuss that further, but today we'd like to hear from you, Mr. Serene, to understand what's happening in the region, and how would you compare it with what last 2 years have brought to the Union Territory of J&K after the abolition of our Article 370? Over to you, Mr. Sering.
Thank you, Manjuji. Very honored to be here. I'm especially sharing a panel with Arshia ji. I think it's a great honor. So thank you so much for accepting to be part of this program, and educating us about so much about this the nitty-gritties and the fine print of what Article 370 offered and deprived the people of Jammu and Kashmir. I'm an outsider. Article 370 never affected me or the people in Gilgit-Baltistan or in Mirpur, Muzaffarabad. So we didn't know much about it. We always thought that it had empowered the people, but the way you're describing it, it shows that it only empowered, either the muftis or the Abdullahs, but did not empower, anyone else. So being an outsider, what I would like to do is look at Article 370 from that perspective. Yeah. And, Article 370 does not apply to a generic, Indian state or province. It applies to a territory that is, claimed by Pakistan, that is also occupied. Parts of it are occupied by Pakistan, that shares border with China and Afghanistan as well. So its location is extremely important. And the reason why I'm mentioning these issues, because Article 370 was used as a strategic tool, not a tool to empower the common people of Jammu and Kashmir, but a strategic tool to empower Pakistan's military and Pakistan's strategic affairs for the last, 50 or 60 years, as long as it has existed. So I think this is something really important that that we need to keep in mind, that there were reasons why it was, as you said, neutered, um, because it did not really provide the basic rights to the common people. But at the same time, it had become a very potent tool in the hands of countries like Pakistan, and they could have shared the same tool with other countries like Turkey and China, and they could have used Kashmir as a stepping stone, as a launch pad to hurt India and Indian interest in the long run. So I think this is like double edged sword that we should look at, as far as Article 370 is concerned. Now, a lot of people would think, and I've countered and talked to these people in the United States. I've talked to these people, in other parts of the world, like at the United Nations, sessions in Geneva, for instance, or in England and in other parts, and they would think that that Kashmir is a matter between India and Pakistan wants to resolve it. This is the perception that people have about Kashmir, right? But I think that Kashmir issue is like a duck laying golden eggs for Pakistan. As long as Kashmir issue is alive and it's laying the golden egg, Pakistani military is benefiting from it. So when I talk to these people, I tell them, like, no, that's not what actually what Pakistan is trying to do to resolve it. What Pakistan is trying to do is to keep it alive as long as possible, turn it into a perpetual industry of like strategic earnings and dividends that it could get from Kashmir. Then also, there's another perception among the outsiders, and they think that the effort that Pakistan is making when it comes engaging with India or the United Nations or trying to talk about Kashmir is that what Pakistan eventually wants is gain control of the Kashmir state to make it its own. And again, when I talk about it, I think that is a very wrong perception. It's actually exactly opposite of it. What Pakistan would like to do is let India keep Kashmir, pay for all the cost of Kashmir, let India build all the roads, let India build, schools and hospitals, let India take all the cost of, how local conflicts happen, and, it leads to, deaths to the Indian soldiers, all that, cost that India has to bear with. But at the end, Pakistan would, swoop in, and with the help of the Kashmiri leadership, and in the name of Islam and two-nation theory, they would be able to reap all the dividends, the strategic benefits from the issue. So if I was Pakistani, I would never want to take the cost, but continue to benefit from it. That would, because the day I acquire control of Kashmir, it will kill the issue. And if it kills the issue, then there's nothing to make benefit of, right? So I think these two important aspects that I look at Kashmir, and eventually I will come back to Article 370 and how it helps, in that matter. But I think these are the two things that people in the West, West means like North America as well as Europe, as well as people in many other countries who are interested in India-Pakistan politics, they get it wrong. They think that Pakistan is trying to acquire control of Kashmir, and it's all about resolving the issue. That's what Pakistan is doing. It's earnest, it's the way it engages.
Sorry, Mr. Singh, sorry to interrupt you there. Now that you have mentioned about the fueling of proxy war by Pakistan, there's a third party to it, which is China now. So would you like to highlight a bit more on that? How China is a third party?
I thought I was going to do what Arshia did, which was do a 10-minute presentation, and then you come in. Is that okay?
No, absolutely. I just thought it shouldn't slip off my mind, but I'll keep that for later. Please continue. Sorry.
All right. Okay. So, after these 2 points that I mentioned about, like, what is the perception of Kashmir issue in the West, and how they look at Pakistan, engaging with Kashmiris, it becomes really important that we need to, like, appreciate Prime Minister Modi for his foresight, because based on what I've just said, it was extremely important for India to abrogate Article 370, or as Arshia said, neuter, the Article 370, because what Article 370 did was it made the Abdullahs and the Muftis and the Hurriyat Conference invincible. It gave them extreme power, in their hand, and they became so powerful that for a very long period of time, for like 30, 40 years, New Delhi did not have an independent policy towards Pakistan or engaging with Pakistan. It had to go through Kashmir, right? And it made the Kashmiri leadership so powerful that they were determining how much concession Delhi should give to Islamabad on each and every issue, and after every incident of terrorist, incident that happened in Kashmir. And I think this was happening for a very long time, where they were dictating. Even though we would expect that New Delhi, being the capital of the country, would have a sovereign policy, but because of Article 370 and because of importance of the location of Jammu Kashmir, um, it actually, the Abdullahs and the Muftis and the Hurriyat Conference and Hizbul Mujahideen, they were able to hijack and keep Delhi hostage, as far as its policy towards Pakistan was concerned. So I think Pakistan, being, the only country that is constantly attacking India and attacking without any provocation, so I think this is something that we have to look at Article 370 from that aspect, that gave a veto to the leadership in Kashmir. And when we say leadership in Kashmir, as Arshia ji said, it's not like, all the loans and all the Das and all the Rathors and all the Dogras and parties. No, it were the two families who understood the importance of Article 370 and how to enable Pakistan to be part of, like, this whole scheme, and that became a perpetual, like, means of their uh, you know government sustainability, or the sustainability of their authority. And I think that is something that, it's very important to understand, which the international community could not understand, especially in this context, when, India and the United States and other countries are trying to be part of this alliance called Quad, in trying to tackle with China's, aggressiveness and abuses against other countries, especially, like the debt trap that it is using to enslave other countries, as well as the aggressiveness and the genocide that it is, committing against the Uyghurs and Tibetans and others. I think this was really important, and the West should understand that you, as Arshia said, needed to defang this one particular part of India, in order for India to have an independent policy towards either in China or Pakistan. And, Pakistan and China being the allies, I think this, was very important that we look at this from that angle. So now Pakistan, we know that, it was not just like hurting India; it was hurting Afghanistan. It was hurting the people of Kashmir itself, who were Muslims. So we would assume that Pakistan, being the Muslim country, came as a benign guardian to protect and, like, free them from the Hindus. But it was not the truth. The truth is that, Pakistan's involvement in the issue on the eastern side was hurting the people of Kashmir. On the western side, it was hurting the people of Afghanistan, and it was all done by the Pakistani military. And we know that Pakistani military, it rules the country. It governs every institution in the country, and the power and the money that it draws from the taxpayers, it is in the name of Kashmir issue. That is the biggest issue that they use. So as long as this Article 370 was there, and the Abdullahs and Muftis could, like, work with and collaborate with Pakistan army, it was like, benefiting both of them. It was going to be there if nobody had dared to take it away, to benefit Pakistan and the local Abdullahs and Muftis, forever. So I think this is something that an article that could have benefited the entire population of Jammu and Kashmir had become hostage in the hand of just two families and, unfortunately, Pakistan. So, and with the passage of time, we saw that, um, like for instance, leaders of Hurriyat or what's his name, Farooq Abdullah himself. He didn't start talking about China. He start talking about, like, how China was an important player in the game. It was, it started happening when Article 370 was still there. So we could see that, they were going to use this tool to broaden their own, horizon, right, and bring in more players like China and Turkey at the cost of India, at the cost of sovereignty of India, but also at the cost of, how India was going to determine its own place, and at the cost of how India was going to determine its future developmental initiatives. Because now, as we see, Modi government is really focused on how to develop the country, building infrastructure, building tunnels, building roads. And, this could not have happened smoothly if you were still stuck, with Pakistan, with its proverbial, what he said, the 1,000 cuts, right? What Zulfikar Ali Bhutto mentions. Bleeding India, exactly. So that's would have gone on, and India would, and China would have never allowed India to focus on its development and let this thing be the main worry for India for a very long time. So this strategic tool that Modi government has been able to remove, it has actually not only defanged the Abdullahs and Muftis, it has defanged Pakistan's army. And I think that is something really important, because here now comes in Gilgit-Baltistan, because of Pakistan's the strength that Pakistani army was drawing from Kashmir issue, from the two nation theory, from India being the biggest threat, because of Kashmir and other issues. It was not only hurting India, it was not only hurting Kashmiris and Afghans, it was hurting the people of Pakistan itself, I mean, today, if you see, Pakistan army literally controls every single civilian institution in the country. Literally every single civilian institution. If you go on social media, you will find the name of all the military retired generals and the brigadiers and the colonels, all the way up to the captains, who control, as chief executive officers or the chairperson or directors, all these Pakistani institutions. So they are choking the Pakistani civil society. They are, violating the freedom of expression. They're violating freedom of, free movement for people. People from Gilgit-Baltistan cannot go to Ladakh, for instance. All these divided families have no access to their loved ones on both sides of the line of control. So this is all done by the Pakistani military. Civilian government, whether it's Nawaz Sharif, whether it's Zardari, whether it's Imran Khan, have no authority to deal with matters. So I think this is something really important, that defanging Pakistani military to strengthen the Pakistani civil society, which then we have a little better chance to have better peace initiatives between India and Pakistan. So I think what PM Modi did was actually, he did a favor to the Pakistani civil society. But if you look at how the Pakistani liberals reacted to it, it was either it was coming from sheer ignorance, right, or it was coming from some kind of pressure, because they condemn Prime Minister Modi for whatever he has done about Article 370. So I think this is something really strange, that we need to study and look into the issues deeply before we build opinion on it. So I'm living in the United States, and all these Pakistanis who live here, and they condemn Pakistani army for what they have done against democracy and violation of constitution and civil rights and all that. We're actually condemning Prime Minister Modi for defanging Pakistani army in a way. So I think this is something that I would like to mention. So As far as Gilgit-Baltistan is concerned, I hope that what India has done is going to bring a lot of attention to Ladakh. You know, it is going to bring infrastructural development to Ladakh, more money to Ladakh. We just heard yesterday, Central University, has been announced for Ladakh. I think it's a big deal. I mean, in Gilgit-Baltistan, we don't have even a technical college. It's been 70 years. Our population is 2 million or over 2 million if you include all those people from Gilgit-Baltistan living in Karachi. Karachi is almost 300,000 people, from our area, right? So from all like Islamabad and Quetta and Lahore, I mean, it's more than 2 million. We don't have even have one medical college, engineering college, technical college, like Polytechnic Institute, nothing. We have to go to Pakistan to get education, higher education, right? So this is something that we try to compare ourselves with Ladakh all the time. So if the defanging of the Abdullahs and Muftis and liberating Ladakh and allowing the central government to bring uh, benefits and funding and budget directly to Ladakh would definitely help us, encourage us to look at Ladakh as a model of of development that India will be working on, and I think that will give some kind of incentive for local people to pressure Pakistan to do better, construct better roads, bring more money for education and health. Even today, like even for a small thing like a pill that you need for your headache, for instance, you have to go to Islamabad. There's nothing in Gilgit-Baltistan. Pakistan doesn't have money to pay wages. There are people on the street who have not had their wages for the last 6 to 8 months, 9 months. It's a perpetual thing. People are always protesting on the street because there's not enough money, and I think this is something that will, comparing Ladakh and Gilgit-Baltistan will give some insight into what we have lost being part of Pakistan. Like people are questioning the decision of their forefathers, that becoming part of Pakistan was not a good idea. It has as far as religion is concerned, people know that there's Shia persecution and Shia genocide going on. So we know that as far as religion is concerned, the Ismailis and the Shias have not benefited that much. But from the development point of view, from the economic point of view, either, I mean, you do not see anything happening in the last 70 years in Gilgit-Baltistan. So I think abrogation or abolition of Article 370 is something that will give the wings to Ladakh. Let's say they will hopefully be able to catch up to their dreams and their all the vision they had for their own region, because we all know that as far as Ladakh, like Leh is concerned, they're always talking about how Ladakh could bring and give so much back to India in terms of, let's say, solar energy, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, I mean, we know strategically it's very important. China is there, Pakistan is there, but like solar energy and hydro energy and other aspects that we could look into how Ladakh could benefit, mineral exploration, and but I think what I feel that Ladakh should have an assembly, a legislative assembly, just like Jammu Kashmir has. So that is something that Ladakhis should have, so they can make their own decisions and have autonomy. So I think I'm ready for Manjuji's questions now. Thank you so much for the last 10-15 minutes with patience that you have let me talk. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Senge
Yeah.
It was really good to hear from you that the Article 365 has not only benefited the people of J&K, but this, if extended further, and if extended, and as you say, defanging those who are with the political motives, can help our brothers and sisters in Gilgit-Baltistan and also in POJK. So we still have time for some questions. I would like to ask, I'll try to continue with my question, Mr. Sering. So we have a third party here to this proxy war. It's China, basically. What do you think the role of China? Where do you think we are heading to with a third party being there now? And how can we control that? And what do you think should be the next steps?
So China is very active in Gilgit-Baltistan. China controls most of the policies that government make on its economic development, infrastructure development, who rules, just like in Nepal, China is trying to dictate who should be the chief minister in Gilgit-Baltistan, in Mirpur, Muzaffarabad, and Balochistan as well. China is trying to dictate, who Pakistan can partner with as far as international community is concerned. So, can the United States invest in Gilgit-Baltistan? Can, other countries invest in Gilgit-Baltistan? It all depends on whether it benefits China or not. So it's not about the benefit of the local people. It is the benefit of the China, and how to, utilize the land of Gilgit-Baltistan for that. So they're occupying our land and resources. There are many pastures in Gilgit-Baltistan where local people have no access anymore because the Chinese are working there, or the Chinese are working on like dam building, and they're bringing their own labor. They're not using local people and giving their opportunity, for instance. Or China is working on local telecommunication sector, but that is not really benefiting local people because they're snooping on to what local people talk about, and who they engage with, and how the politics work. And this is how China is controlling local politics, right? So there are a lot of things that is happening that China is doing, which in the bigger context, you see maybe benefiting the region, but not the people who live here. And with the passage of time, Pakistanis settling in Gilgit-Baltistan and China controlling local politics and economy, I think the locals will be a minority very, very soon. Their lands are already been leased out to outsiders. The minister, the deputy speaker of Gilgit-Baltistan Assembly once said that every single mountain that could be, deemed or seen useful has been leased out. And the local people do not know that. There's many of those parts of Gilgit-Baltistan are still, quote unquote, in control of local people. They use the pastures, but one day, if somebody has to start exploring the minerals there, the laws are in place where the locals could be completely deprived and told, that 20 years ago this land was leased to somebody, and now they're here, and now you have to stop, using it as your common property regime or pastures, or the irrigation network. We get water from the glaciers, so all the irrigation network that comes down the mountains, that will be blocked by the outsiders. So, and it actually happened. The Chinese, they were in District Giza, for instance. The Chinese they were blasting for mining, and it destroyed the local irrigation system. And when the locals protested, then they were charged for terrorism and sedition and treason, and they were put in jail, 20 or 22 people, something like that. So I think this is something that the Chinese are doing in Nepal, China's doing here, China's doing in Sri Lanka, Chinese are doing in, POK, I believe that, this installation of new prime minister in POK right now has happened with the approval of the Chinese. It's the same with Balochistan. They seek China's approval. So I think China is very much in the fray, and they are controlling everything. And the future, as I said, India and United States working together and strengthening Quad and try to iron out all the differences. I think that is something that is important. And local people in Gilgit-Baltistan are realizing that China is not there to benefit local people. So I think these are the people that need to speak more against what is China doing, and bring out information. So I think China is a country that needs to be dealt with, definitely.
Thank you.
Senge, I'd like to come in here.
Yeah, sure, please.
In contrast, when this abrogation, the nullification of Article 370 happened, the first thing that we heard from even Indian liberals or Pakistani liberals was that now there's going to be a demographic change in Kashmir, and all the Indians are going to rush to take land and everything there. It's not like that. Because as you were talking about China, doing all these things in Gilgit-Baltistan, anybody who wants to buy land in Kashmir or Jammu for that matter, there are certain conditions to it. You have to fulfill certain conditions, because this is being kept in mind. It's a fragile Himalayan region. The ecosystem is very fragile, so that is being dealt with, and the Indian government is completely, at par with the local politicians, with the local people. It understands that there's no demographic change happening in Kashmir.
नहीं, पाकिस्तानी ऐसा इसलिए सोचते हैं ना क्योंकि पाकिस्तान की के लोग को उनकी आर्मी जिस तरह ट्रीट करती है वो समझते हैं इंडिया भी ऐसा है, राइट? पाकिस्तान की आर्मी जहां चाहे जमीनों पे कब्जा करती है, और गिलगित बल्तिस्तान में तो फॉर द लास्ट 70 इयर्स हमारा वहाँ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है ही नहीं. इट्स बिन रूल्ड बाय अ मिनिस्टर, कश्मीर अफेयर्स मिनिस्टर, who is never a local. He is always a Pakistani. Right now he is a Pashtun from KPK province, right? Gandapur. तो चूंकि पाकिस्तानियों के साथ ये होता रहता है कि आर्मी आती है, बुलडोज करती है, जमीन पे कब्जा करती है, वो समझते हैं कि इंडिया which has this constitutional freedom and empowerment, और वहाँ के कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के हिसाब से और जुडिशियल जो मैकेनिज्म है उनके हिसाब से इंडिया ने चलना होता है. पाकिस्तानी ये नहीं समझ सकते, वो समझते हैं कि इंडिया भी ऐसा करता है. and this is something that people of Gilgit Baltistan should look at and compare themselves, and people in Muzaffarabad obviously, that India, even I mean, Article 370 does not mean just one issue, which is land right. Article 370 was much bigger. So that's what the people of Gilgit Baltistan and who oppose Article 370's abolition and Pakistanis, they miss. They think that it was just one issue, which was state subject rule, which is not true. And the land rights could be protected without Article 370. There's so many other provisions in India's constitution, and Indians are very quick at taking care of things and bringing more amendments to the constitution, whereas Pakistanis, they took like almost 60 years to just change the name of NWFP province to KPK. एक नाम change करने में उसको 60 साल लग गए, because it needed constitutional amendment. So
also,
I think,
also that even though Article 370 has been nullified, India still has given freedom for petitioners. There are 23 petitions in several courts in India, challenging this. There's a 5-bench court, so we have this freedom to even challenge whatever the government has.
And Pakistan is no court where people could go and challenge anything. वहाँ पे ये जो ordinances आते रहते हैं, and so yeah, I mean, I think when we start comparing India and Pakistan, zameen asman ka fark hai, and this is what the Pakistani liberals are missing. They try to always cause this false equivalence, which I really hate it. यहाँ भी बहुत से लोग बैठे हैं DC में जो सारा दिन इंडिया पाकिस्तान को compare करते रहते हैं. And India is a flourishing democracy. If you want to compare India, let's compare with the United States. Let's compare with the other democratic societies where democracy has been functioning for a long time. लेकिन यहाँ के जो पाकिस्तानी liberals हैं वो सारा दिन ये जो equivalence create करते हैं इंडिया और पाकिस्तान की. So I think this is, little injustice to what India has achieved so far in the last 70 years. Thank you for bringing it up. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. On that note, Aisha ji, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about the ecosystem, which is pro-Pakistani in J&K.
Yeah.
So what is the thought process, and with the political engagement in the past 2 years, what do you think a common Kashmiri, a common person from J&K thinks? Has there been a change of thoughts lately?
There's been a lot of change of thought. As I said, the candidates who came for the DDC elections, they're very happy that any kind of person from any walk of life can come and contest elections. It's not in the hand of the certain political dynasties. I wrote an article recently that the nullification of the article is just a step for dismantling what I call the Intifada factory. The name for the ecosystem that I've given. The Intifada factory is a coterie of journalists, bureaucrats, civil society, unfortunately, of Kashmir, which comprises of engineers and doctors, but it's mostly NRI, NRKs, non-resident Kashmiris living in London, where JKLF has its headquarters, living in the US, even living in Scandinavian countries. They've kind of spread out as a network into these left bastions, left academic universities, and from there is this anti-India narrative coming out. I think they're funding it also, the Intifada factory in Kashmir, and because of this, because of the fear factor that this Intifada factory had, created, nobody could stick their neck out and say, "Okay, I'm pro-India," or "I feel that Kashmir's future lies with India." Because of the nullification, slowly, as it's sunk in that this could be dismantled, this whole ecosystem, the Intifada factory could be dismantled, and India is very serious about it. Like recently, 11 government employees were sacked from the government service for just being involved in terror activities. Two sons of the Saeed Salahuddin, across the borders were, see, Indian democracy, two sons of the man who's sworn to bring down India. He was employed in the government sector. They were employed. So as they call it the Swachhta Abhiyan, the cleanliness campaign in government, they're doing that. Even among the police personnel, even among journalists and all that. Still, it's not disappearing those journalists. India is not. There's a proper process going on. They are, first of all, the National Investigative Agency, NIA, investigates them. There's a charge sheet filed. They're arrested. There's a full trial process, and then they are, they go through the whole process of the law. So yes, people are watching it. People are seeing it. A lot of other, you could say, micro blogs have come up. People are independently publishing their views and all. It's like in war, from the trenches, you stick your head out and see if it's safe to say something or not, and then trying to survive basically. Because we had this Intifada factory. They would knock at doors. I myself was threatened at my workplace. My husband was alive then, and he was a journalist in the media, Kashmiri media. Censored a lot. I saw his frustration of 15 years. Couldn't, survive that, and actually choked himself because, in medical parlance, it's called a heart attack. But I know what happened because he would be censored all the time. And it was so frustrating to live there. So frustrating. So the Intifada factory, it's still not up to par, as we don't have the direct access to the government. All we can do is, we can write and we can speak up. And now that Clubhouse has come, we have these rooms, and sometimes or the other, some government leader drops in, and we do have this one-to-one with them. And all we can say is kindly do not invite the political dynasties for talks anymore. They assure us that it's a formality. It's a formality, and that India talks to everybody. India does. I am a little bit bolder, and I say this approach of India is exactly what gave India the Shimla Agreement, what gave India Kargil War, what gave India the Mumbai attacks. I am bold enough to say that. But they assure me that India is never going to, this ethos of India of talking to everybody, India is never going to go away from that. So it's just a formality, but it's sinking in. The people are understanding, they will be heard eventually.
Absolutely. So this has been a decisive step, I would say, having brought peace and justice to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and we hope the same is extended to our brothers and sisters in POJK and Gilgit-Baltistan. And thank you so much both. It was really a pleasure to talk to you both and get that insight from inside and outside of the state. And pleasure to have you both. And thank you everybody for tuning in. We have another program on 12th of, I think, August, which is about the elections in POJK. More details will be sent over shortly. But thank you so much. Thanks for your valuable time.
Namaste. Thank you. Senge,
you so much.
To be with you. Honor to share the stage with you.
Arshia, thank you so much. I'm very honored, and I hope one day I can see, meet you, and then have a cup of tea with you.
I hope so too.
Thank you.